Okay, so when I started this video, I sort of started to drift. I know my ethical foundations are of universality or of humans in general. I know even though the other side is trying to dehumanize me, that I can't do that from a point of principle. Now, I may have to react to what they do and counter it in order to preserve universal humanism or just universality. I may have to do that. I have to allow myself to react in such a way as to counter the power that's attempting to destroy universality. I mean, I have a moral obligation to do that, to uphold what's actually true, the nature aspect of humanity, as opposed to the particularity of subgrouping, where people try to insist that their subgroups are universal, creating violence among lower level subgroups. Because if we leaned into the realization of universality that's based on evolutionary determinism, that's a given beyond choice, if we leaned into that, those particularities that are attempting to sell you on their universality would disappear, because you would understand that only what's universal is universal. That's the ethic I lean into, and people like me lean into the nature aspect, universality, empathy, because we understand that in the end, suffering, death, destruction, all these things have to be avoided at all costs. We can argue about how humans truly flourish, but no subgroup or universal, no upper level universal group's ever going to argue for the suffering of somebody, the suffering of a group directly. And sometimes, you're faced with two bad options where, in order to choose the best available option, there's going to be collateral damage. We don't create reality, or reality. Some situations come up in reality that we can't avoid, and where there's going to be at least some bad outcomes, and we just choose the best option. And it's not going to be, the best option is not going to be the best option for my group. The best option is going to be the best option for everybody, where the most people possible win. So that's the way that we tackle things. And but we always have to be mindful of Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance. If somebody's out, there's groups of people out there trying to subvert universal human necessity, we have to react back with the same power, or a little bit more, to put down those attacks on universality. Protecting universality is paramount. And we know that we're not going to be attacking them, any kind of subgroup, just out of principle. We don't want to do that. We're forced to do it in a reactive sense. For those of us who say we can never do that because we have to be the bigger person, or we have to be we have to be the larger group and be inclusive of everyone, well, the people that are attacking you will subvert that, and they will marginalize and persecute everyone else who's different from them. They're a particular group. They're regional, culture. They're subjective. As far as I'm concerned, cultures that are isolated and aren't facing a lot of change subjectively deviate from universality. They don't have any check that there is difference out there that I have to deal with. So they become conformist, and they try to beat out any kind of difference from anyone around them laterally, and they subjectively deviate, because the way we stay focused is by having a certain amount of change in our environment and dealing with things that are different. Then that puts a check on the sameness, the conformity aspect. So areas that have been isolated for a long time, it's just not good to move those people directly into situations where they have to deal with difference, because it can take a generation to get used to it. And it might be okay to move some people into there, but those into the area where those people have been separated, and that would afford change for them at the expense of that different population. But what I'm getting at is that, while we do have to be inclusive in a universal sense, all human rights have to be respected. We also have to be aware of the idea that some of those that we're inclusive of would destroy inclusivity at the top level, that which we need to maintain universality and human nature, really. There are some who insist that moral propositions cannot be necessarily true or false in the same sense that scientific facts are true or false. I consider myself a moral realist because I lean into consequentialism as a guide to what is right or wrong. That just means I look at the outcomes of certain actions and I make judgments about whether to perform the actions again. There's nothing really to go on if we don't have a goal in mind. I have no way to say an action is productive or destructive if I'm not trying to achieve something or I don't have some centered principles. The most basic goal for humanity is just human utility. Preserve life and prevent suffering. This goal to preserve life and prevent suffering, some would say, is no more important or correct than a person who has the goal to destroy life and maximize suffering. Relativists would just say that's two different points of view and neither one carries any special significance over the other. In isolation, it's all just words. But when we add a historical view and we examine the probability of outcomes, the paths of certain goals become clear. The fair evaluation of probability and consequence shows you a dim image of the likely future. Sure, my support of productive human outcomes is just me standing up to be counted with human utility. While I can't point to any single proof that it's the fact that productivity is necessarily good, we can gather data sets to support likely outcomes, especially these days with AI. Those data sets are objective evidence. So given history and given probability, preserving productivity and avoiding destructive behaviors, as they are measured against outcomes that preserve life and avoid suffering, for all intents and purposes, is objectively supported through a consequential evaluation. So if I set the goal to preserve life, there's evidence available to me to know what the likely outcome of my choices will be. It's not just relative, where one choice is no different than the next. Now that I've got this sort of compass alignment within myself, preserve and support human life, I can just assume the goal when I'm managing next steps and taking morally justified actions. This is why I support moral realism over emotivism, because even the way we feel about things is a reaction to some physical contingencies in the objective reality we live in. Let's talk a little bit about moral realism. Moral realism is the meta-ethical view that there are objective moral facts or truths that exist independently of human beliefs, feelings, or cultural norms. According to moral realism, some actions are genuinely right or wrong, good or bad, regardless of whether individuals or societies recognize them as such. So this goes back to what I said in the beginning. There's really no proof outside of consequential evaluation that it's better to become empathetic rather than psychopathic. I think, at the level it's just you making a choice. I can't prove to you that slaughtering 100 people is worse than saving 100 people unless you've already accepted the goal of basic human utility. I mean, if basic human utility is on the table for you to question, you've gone too far. You've gone too far in the wrong direction. At that point, you've ceased to act as a human and you become an individual, but in the worst way, at the expense of humanity. Without support for basic human utility, you become effectively amoral. Basically, moral actions become coincidental rather than intentional. There's no way to prove to you that destroying your fellow humans directly or indirectly is a bad thing if you're willing to throw out basic human utility. Let's define emotivism. The emotive theory of ethics, also known as emotivism, is a meta-ethical view that suggests moral statements do not convey facts or truths, but instead express the speaker's emotions or attitudes. According to this theory, when someone makes a moral statement, such as killing is wrong, they're not stating a fact about the world, but rather expressing disapproval of killing, similar to saying, I don't support killing. So deciding on a goal of basic human utility at the top level is an emotional or attitude-based decision. But that decision isn't based on nothing. In fact, it's based on objective consequential evidence. Therefore, while the initial choice may be one of attitude, one spends their life reinforcing that decision at all levels of physical reality. I know at this level, those that I'm calling effectively anti-human actors would likely refer to some balance of ideas off of this lens. System for the system. System for the people. People for the system. People for the people. Your empathetic people generally assume the system should serve all people. Otherwise, what's the point? A system that doesn't have the goal of serving all the people in the end runs the risk of crushing marginalized groups, especially under the indifferent gears of the system. Your more liberated individuals are those who don't consider human utility a given. They're people for the system type people, and they lean into the people for the people category in such a way that they're capitalists, but they're anti-government because the government's the union of the people. They'll push charity in the place of a social safety net. By the way, I'm not anti-capitalist, but capitalism is something that should be reserved for non-necessary production. Of course, those of us who consider human utility as unquestionable understand that a people for the system mentality is basically indirect slavery to a degree. Ethically speaking, necessity should be free. But pragmatically, we aren't there yet. So anyway, the top level human goal, human utility, in my mind is non-negotiable. Those who make it a choice are deviants. They'll choose any option to just not go along with the group. While it may be emotional or attitude-based, there's plenty of evidence when you walk the path what the consequences are and where the culpability lies. You're proving over and over again what you stand with. And honestly, guys, how could life not be a test with this situation? It really seems like we're in some kind of buffer zone test situation where we're being sorted, similar to what the Bible says, which is funny. We're being sorted out. But I just think that the people that think that they're good really are the ones that are being separated, and that the majority of us who think naturally, who think ethically, who think universally, who think with a humanistic mindset, who think about fairness, justice, equality for all, are the ones that are actually good, and are the ones that are not going to accept anything short of that, to the point where they can't accept at least good portions of religion, because religion is a particularity selling itself as a universal. Religion is something that can only be truly ethical indirectly. Whatever religion has that seems like wise, ethical lessons, in my mind, is taken from philosophy and rebranded, because it's critical thinking and attention to change that drives wisdom and ethics. So anyway, if you guys like this kind of philosophical subject matter, help us out by liking the video and subscribing to the channel.